By listening to this podcast, you agree to not use this podcast as medical advice to treat any medical condition in yourself or others, including, but not limited to, patients that you are treating. Consult your own physician for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast. Under no circumstances shall any guests or contributors to the podcast or any employees, associates, or affiliates of the Neuroendocrine Cancer Awareness Network be responsible for damages arising from use of this podcast. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Nets Get Real. I am your host, Mike Wayman. I want to wish everybody a happy new year. 2023 was really awesome. Thank you, everybody who participated in the Strides for Stripes walk this year, especially the virtual one. We have exceeded expectations, and we can't wait to do it again next year. Once again, 2024 is here. So that means a whole new set of conferences. The first one this year is going to be in San Diego at the Holiday Inn, San Diego Bayside, February 17th. If you want more information, go to netcancerawareness.org or go to our social medias at netcanceraware. Besides that, if the San Diego thing is just not in your area, we are hitting Miami, Iowa, New Orleans, and Nashville, and possibly others. So stay tuned, keep on our website. So now I would like to welcome our guest today, Kelly Baughman. How are you?
Hi, thanks for having me.
No, thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming in and sharing your story with everybody. So yeah, just tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Okay. So I was born and raised in Louisiana and went to nursing school here in Louisiana. And everybody thought I was crazy when in 1998 I left and defected to Las Vegas because people in Louisiana don't do that. So I went out there as a nurse, but less than a year later got into pharmaceutical sales and loved it and just didn't look back. And but I had always had GI issues, not too horrible at first. Always got told I had IBS. I do know that around 2006, somebody did an MRI on me where they saw a cyst on my pancreas, but they never told me. And so just throughout the years, I had been to doctor after doctor after doctor trying to figure out why I had stomach aches and different kinds of issues, and often told that I had IBS. And in 2016, I hired a concierge doctor because he was one of my customers as a rep. And I saw how much time he spent with his patients. And he put me through all these tests and finally came back and said, yeah, I see this cyst on your pancreas. And I believe you have idiopathic chronic pancreatitis. And I was like, wow, what? And I just continued to get sicker through 2017. My hair started falling out. I got to the point where I had this really weird thing where I couldn't talk. And he sent me to this throat specialist, and there was nothing wrong with my vocal cords. We couldn't figure out why it was happening. So I had to go on sick leave, and I just was getting sicker and sicker and sicker, couldn't eat, lost a ton of weight. And his advice to me was, why don't you go home to your family and spend some time with them? Which, looking back on it, was kind of like, why don't you go say your goodbyes, And it was kind of strange advice, but at the time I thought it was the end of the world. Like, I had to pack up everything that I'd had for 25 years. I got rid of everything. My sister came out and helped me, and we just took what would fit in a Honda Civic. So it wasn't a lot. And I came back to Louisiana, and my family lives in a small town, so not New Orleans, like about 5 hours north of New Orleans. So I got here, and I was just in kind of this like disconnected shock that I had never experienced before. Very sad and upset that I felt like my life was over, but I didn't really know what to do. And then I guess, pharmaceutical rep in me took over, and I just started trying to figure out what I was going to do to, for the rest of my life. So at the end of 2018, I found a pancreatic surgeon about 90 miles away. And the day he met me, he hospitalized me for a week and did a ton of tests and said, "Why didn't anybody ever biopsy this cyst?" And I was like, "I don't know. I have no idea." And so he did. And a couple of weeks later is when I was told it was neuroendocrine cancer, which I had never heard of. So I felt relief when I was told the diagnosis, because for at least 15 years, I had just been told over and over and over again, you have gastritis, or you have IBS, or you have H. pylori. And I just kept getting sicker. So maybe it didn't quite sink in that, he said cancer, but he said, "I need to take this out right away. So I'm going to schedule you for surgery in January." So in January of 2019, I had a distal pancreatectomy. Right around that time, I started investigating NETs a little bit more and found some support groups on Facebook. But I still had no idea what in the world this disease was. Like, all of a sudden, all these acronyms came up, like, well, what's KI67? And I was like, what? And I had a really hard time with that, because I thought, well, I trained as a nurse. I worked in the medical field for 25 years. Why don't I understand this? Why is it so hard for me to understand it? And I ruminated on that a lot. But through one of the Facebook groups, I found out that there was a NETS clinic in New Orleans at Ochsner. And I was like, wow, what are the chances? And so I called them, and I actually got to talk to Dr. Waltering on the phone before my surgery. And he said, "Yes, you're doing the right thing. Have the surgery, and then come down here, give it about 3 months, because we want to see everyone who has your diagnosis." So then after that, I felt a lot better about what was happening, had the surgery, but didn't have any idea what to expect with the surgery. So then joined a Facebook group about that, thank goodness, because for about 2 months, I couldn't eat or drink, or thought I was dying. But I was readmitted to the hospital here in this small town, and they had never heard of my cancer, never heard of my surgery, and my surgeon wouldn't take their calls. So I ended up being in the hospital and getting pneumonia, and it was a pretty terrible time for me, because I felt like, well, is this my fault? Why isn't anyone taking responsibility? Or what's different about my story from everybody else? But I just really didn't know anything about the disease yet. So when I finally made it down to the neuroendocrine clinic in New Orleans, I still didn't know enough to know what questions to ask. And I would get very angry about that later with myself. But I was told I was cured. I was told I was just a one and done. So I thought, oh my gosh, okay, this is great. Well, so I went right back into pharmaceutical sales and took a job in New Orleans so I could be close to the clinic. And I continued to have issues. I was very sick a lot of the time, still with GI issues. And so I kept going back to the clinic and kept being told, "No, you know what? It's IBS all over again." And I thought, wow, I thought once you were told you had cancer, like, people take you a little more seriously or what have you. That's a little bit what was going through my mind. But since, we got to 2021 and I was still being told that, I was hired by Bayer, and that was my dream job. That was the company I wanted to retire from, and it was back in Las Vegas. And I was like, all right, well, they must be right. What do I know? So I took it, moved back to Las Vegas in May of 2021. And by August of 2021, I was in the ER with horrible abdominal pain and on sick leave, and never went back to work. January 2022 is when I had to quit. I just felt like I was in some kind of no man's land where, I was falling through the cracks because I didn't have a net specialist. There wasn't anybody in Las Vegas that does that. Um, I did a telehealth with Dr. Lou in Denver, and he was wonderful. And I'd watched a bunch of his talks trying to learn, and I thought, man, none of this is what happened to me. So again, I kept thinking, what's wrong with me? What did I do wrong? Because I'm a medical professional. I should have done better. I should have known better. I blamed myself a lot for what happened. And I finally had to come back home again. And this time around, it was very different. I thought the first time, oh, cancer changed my life and I'm going to be a better person and a better rep. But this time it was hardcore. It was walking through fire. You've got to sell your car. You've got to cash in your 401k. You've got to apply for Social Security disability. You've got to apply for food stamps and then jump up and down for joy when you get them. A world I had never been a part of. And it changed me. And it finally was the cancer changes you for the better that I just didn't know that I needed. And I read somewhere where somebody said, you can make a choice that either cancer is going to make you bitter or make you better. And that stuck with me. But also they said, if it's going to make you better, how's it going to make you better? So I thought, okay, well, what I need to do is, as soon as I figure my situation out, I need to try to figure out how I can be a patient advocate and put my skills from the past, navigating the medical world, into helping people who are behind me so that other people don't have to feel the way that I felt. The guilt and what's wrong with me. And, I went through a period where I was afraid to even talk to anybody about it because I felt like, well, everyone else has this perfect situation where they're going to a neuroendocrine center and their doctor's great. And, but slowly I started coming out of that. The more research that I did and the more groups that I became a part of, like NCAN and like the Neuroendocrine Tumor Research Foundation. I mean, there's just so much out there. And the key was talking to as many patients as possible. I can't remember because my brain fog gets bad, but one of the foundations, asks you if you want to have a patient mentor who's way ahead of you, And so I did that. And this guy is so great. He calls me religiously to check on me. And he's, years ahead of me in this whole thing. And if I would have had that in the very beginning, it would have changed everything. So I guess very long story short, there's a lot of takeaways from that. I'm sure you have questions, but that's kind of my story in a nutshell, is that I got a very wobbly start and feel like a couple of years of my life were wasted, but there was a lot of time that I blamed myself for it, and I had to work through that.
Now, like right now, where are you at now in terms of your
So now, when I came back here, I was dismayed to find out that the Oster Clinic had disbanded and wasn't
yes.
here anymore. So I was like, oh, of course. Um, so right now, I have been fortunate enough to be accepted at, the clinic in Miami. And I am going to be seeing that Dr. Shawan, is that how you say his
I'm
name?
on Sean. Yep.
Um, January 19th. So
Okay.
I'm very excited about becoming his patient, meeting him. I've heard such good things about him. I've, seen him speak. Because I still have a lot of symptoms that are being attributed to it possibly being NETs, like carcinoid syndrome for the first time. I never had that before. And when you have it, you know what it is. It's awful. And having a lot of fatigue, and still a lot of GI issues that someone's got to get to the bottom of. So I am very excited to become his patient, and then I'm not sure if I will stay here, if I'll go back to Las Vegas, or what I will do. But I understand now that, there's a lot of people that can come to these doctors from all over the country. And as long as you can find a good doctor to help, work with the net specialist, you can pretty much live anywhere. But that's what my plan is right now. I just want to be very careful about,
Mhm.
I don't want to say anything negative about anybody, but I also want to, tell patients to trust themselves about, not everybody's going to have the same rapport with the same doctor, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And I questioned myself so much, and I kept thinking everything was my fault, because that clinic wasn't taking me seriously when I went to see them. And they were trying to tell me, you just have IBS again. And I know now in my gut, I don't have IBS. IBS is a symptom that something else is wrong, but I am so much sicker than that. And
Sure.
so, hopefully they are doing some good work with some other patients, but it just isn't the right situation for me.
Hmm.
And finally, after 5 years, I trust myself enough to know that. And for a while, it paralyzed me, and I just didn't do anything. And
Sure.
then I realized you just can't sit here and do nothing because it will wreck the rest of your life.
Hmm.
So I finally confided in someone who is, in this world of nets, a patient advocate that everyone knows. And they, helped me feel better about that situation, and, told me, well, you're entitled to a second or third opinion,
Yeah.
and don't feel bad about it. You're not the only person this has happened to. And that conversation was huge, because you might try to tell your therapist or your social worker, but they don't understand nets.
Sure.
So
Sure.
they try to be supportive, but it's not really until you talk to someone who has been through it, or has a family member that's been through it and is really involved in this world, and they give you permission to feel that way, that you feel like it's okay. And then I thought, well, yeah, of course I have a right to a second opinion. Duh. What would I tell, my mom or dad if they came to me with that?
Sure.
So
Well, I think that and that's something that we kind of try and tell everybody is that, what, one doctor to one person may not be the same, have
yeah,
the same compatibility with another patient. It's all about how you feel, how comfortable you feel with the
yeah.
whole thing. And yeah, I think that's incredibly important. That's what advocacy is all about.
Yeah, I was like, well, Kelly, I called on cardiologists almost my entire career, and I even worked in rare disease. And I, looked back at that and thought, what would you tell one of those patients if, I was in pulmonary hypertension, which got misdiagnosed all the time? And, I thought about that a lot. What would you tell one of those people? You wouldn't tell them, oh, okay, well, I know your doctor thinks you have COPD, but just deal with it. No, you wouldn't tell that person that. So why are you telling yourself that? So, I just learned so much and grown so much. And a lot of it has been through, NCAN's resources, and listening to talks so much, by doctors, and realizing that it's okay to go and keep looking for somebody that, you have a rapport with, somebody that's going to keep looking until they find out why you're sick, and somebody that respects you. And to, realize that every neuroendocrine patient is different, and that, a protocol of one size fits all doesn't work for our disease. And, it's hard when other people don't understand your disease as well, like, especially in this small town. My family goes to this really big church. If you've ever heard of the Duck Dynasty people,
Hmm. Yep.
that's the church my family goes to. I grew up with them. And no one understood my diagnosis, and they would question me about it. Like, well, I don't understand. Do you really have cancer? So far as to someone questioning me, was I making it all up, you know?
Yeah,
And I don't know if that happens to other people. Well, no, I
it
have
does.
heard that it happens to other people. But when something like that happens to you, especially like in the town you grew up in,
Yeah.
you're just like, are you kidding me? Who would ever make this up? So,
Well, I mean, I could tell you from I don't know if you've listened to any of the talks on the YouTube page or anything, but my mom, when she was trying to figure out her diagnosis and stuff, they were at a very well known uh medical facility in New York City because we're from New York. Um, my dad and her were sitting next to each other in the office with the doctor. My dad's been by her side the whole time trying to figure out what's going on. They're holding hands, and he said, I think your issues are from a bad marriage."
oh my
So
God.
you're
Uh,
certainly not the only person.
yeah, yeah, I've had some crazy things that's awful. I'm so sorry that your mom went through that. But yeah, that's why it's more important than ever to your podcast like yours to get awareness out there because even when someone gets, diagnosed, like we were talking about, celebrities like Jimmy Buffett,
Yeah,
dying, and people did not understand that that was a form of neuroendocrine,
right.
and how wrong, they got it when Steve Jobs was diagnosed. And I remember how they just clobbered him in the media. And now that I know that I have exactly the same, tumor and everything that he had, and I really read his story, I just feel so bad that he went through all of that when it's just because people just did not understand. And, like I said, working in rare disease like I did, there were some doctors who would say, yeah, I want to learn about this so that I can treat it. But then there were some doctors who were just very upfront and would say, I don't want to deal with this.
Right.
And, so just don't bring it to me. And I appreciated that because some of them who were trying to treat it and didn't know what they were doing would kill patients.
It's
So,
yeah, it's really just they're throwing everything but including the kitchen sink at it, and some of that medication as as a pharmaceutical rep, it's poisonous sometimes.
well, I was always trying to, it was the people in the suburbs and the outskirts of town, and I'd be trying to convince them to go to a center. That's what's so funny is now that's what my life is about is, oh, it's really important to make sure that people understand that they go to a neuroendocrine clinic. And, I went to an oncologist here locally so that I could get the referral to Miami. And they said, well, we do it here. Why do you have to leave? But I can tell just from talking to them, it's nicest people. They've never seen a neuroendocrine patient in their entire life in this small
Right.
town in Louisiana, but they wanted me to think that they had. And, I didn't want to say anything rude or mean or anything. I just was like, well, I want to go there because they're doing like the latest research and clinical trials. Maybe you could get me in a trial or something. I tried to put it that way. So then I said, I'm not going to stop seeing you as my doctor.
Right. You just don't want to be their guinea pig. That's all.
Yeah. It's, you really have to think about how you say things.
Sure.
And I borrow from other people all the time how to phrase things. I mean, I thought I knew how to talk to doctors. That's why I also thought, well, I'm going to come in here, like when I met that pancreatic surgeon, I had this little binder. I had taken my resume binder and turned it into my healthcare binder, and I thought he's going to respect me because I'm going to be like, I was a nurse and I was a pharmaceutical rep and here's all my records. And it didn't mean anything to him. So it did, some of them don't care who you are.
Yeah.
It's you never know how it's going to go. But
Yeah.
there are definitely so many tips that I've picked up along the way, and it all has been due to the neuroendocrine um, support groups and the neuroendocrine foundations. That's where it's all come from. And that's really important to me to try to share what I've learned because I need a reason to exist. I do not plan, right now, I don't plan to go back to pharmaceutical sales. Like I said, instead, I would rather feel like I'm helping the people who are in the place I was 5 years ago. Like my mentor helped me. And I don't want anyone to ever question themselves like I did, or feel like they've just fallen through the cracks, or they're scared to go to another doctor. Um, so that's what's really important to me now.
That's awesome. I love the fact that you want to give back. Yeah, it is such a special community. You know, I don't know if there really is. There's bigger communities that have a lot more publicity and stuff behind it, but this is a really tight knit, really great community. So it's awesome to have you wanting to give back and be a part of it. Something that I did want to ask is being a medical professional. We've had on this show, we've had a few, we've had nurses, we've had doctors, we've had, pharmacists, stuff like that. As a nurse and as a pharmaceutical salesperson, um, did that at all impact your anything with your like treatment plan or your diagnosis or your you'd mentioned that you thought, no, maybe it's my fault or anything like that. Did any of your background do anything positive or negative in terms of your diagnosis?
Oh, for sure. Well, first of all, as most sales reps are, I'm extremely type A. So the loss of control in the beginning was so hard for me. I still struggle with it. And so, having no control over anything, finding a doctor who was going to help you, finding out what was wrong, being misdiagnosed for, all of these things were completely out of my control. And then, having to sell my car and feeling like I was just losing everything. All of that is very hard for someone who is type A. And especially someone who had been taking care of themselves, completely independent for 25 years. And then you've got to move back in with your parents.
Right.
But on the flip side, what I think is important is have you ever heard of that book, The Four Agreements? It's pretty old.
It sounds familiar.
Yeah, a friend gave it to me a million years ago, and I pulled it back out, and um, I was looking at it again, and like the first one is, or I don't know if this is in order, but don't take anything personally. And I remember the first time I read that, I was like, well, how on earth are you supposed to do that? Um, but it's kind of talking about like if someone's walking down the opposite side of the street and they look at you, you're a total stranger, and they call you fat and you get upset. It's about how that person has some issues with being fat, and it's not about you. And so that is very relevant here because there's so much that we can take personal, but most of it is not about us. If the doctor comes in and he has a bad day, or you're just not in front of the doctor that's going to be the doctor for you, it's just, you could go on. And don't make assumptions is another one. And when you don't know what's going on and you don't have a definite, you start to make all kinds of assumptions, and that can be so bad for you. um, Always do your best. And I remember thinking about this one back then, because the caveat to it was your best is different at different times in your life, and your best is different when you're sick versus when you're well. And I thought, oh, I love that they put that in there, because again, as a person who's always been an overachiever and type A and everything, all of a sudden to not even be able to go to the grocery store for myself, I just felt like such a loser. And then the last one, be impeccable with your word, was very hard for me too, because I kept having to cancel things, whether it was a doctor's appointment or if it was, like a night with a friend, and people didn't understand. So I learned that that's why having people in these net support groups, talking to people and making friends with other people who have this disease is so important, because otherwise, if you just try to keep the same people in your life, that they're not going to understand why you can't do the things you did before. I mean, my own mother has been my biggest cheerleader, but there are times when she will say, you know, well, I get tired too. And she doesn't understand that it's not tired. It is
Yeah.
this fatigue that just stops you from doing anything. So, you know, the negative things in the beginning, I've tried to turn them into positive things, or tried to say, because I remember in pharma, they would ask me interview questions and be like, what obstacles have you overcome? And you'd be so excited to answer that.
Yeah.
And now I feel like it's more like, um, I'm in this place, or I'm happier because of those obstacles, not in spite of them. So I read something on one of the pages about, when you feel like you're out of control, um, first of all, don't cross a bridge until you come to it. So don't worry about all those scans or blood works you're going to get in 6 months. What good does that do you? Um, think outside the box. And this one said something like, you know what? Realize that you're lucky that you are getting the scans. And I was like, yes, because I sat here for almost a year where nobody even wanted to do anything. So we get anxious about that stuff, but then we need to see that it's a blessing that you're able to get it done. um 3, keep busy. And that's huge, because if you're just sitting around worrying about yourself, I think we all know that's just a terrible, terrible place to be. So that's why I tried to get involved in music again. But if I was feeling really bad, just even little things like just getting um online. And you asked how my background helped me. Well, for instance, I was trying to get an octreotide prescription, and my insurance approved it, and they said you need a prior auth. Well, I knew exactly what that meant from I used to do that all day long at work. And so but for some reason the nurse was having trouble with it. So I called up and I was like, can I just do this for you? He said, no, you can't do it for me. But I basically was calling the pharmacy, I was calling the nurse, and I was doing everything I could with my knowledge to get it done, because I could see for some reason the nurse was having trouble with it. So if I see something like that, or the other day, pharmacy said, your doctor didn't give us the right code for your prescription. And I said, do you mean ICD-10 code? And they said, yeah. And I said, I guess I can't give it to you. And he said, no, your doctor's office has to do it, But I went in and looked up which code it should be, because my doctor's office takes forever to do things. And so I kind of, if I know what something is, then I try to do it, if that makes
You're,
sense. And
yeah.
because I know how busy these people are in these doctors' offices, I know they don't have time. And a lot of times I understand the language and I know what it is they're looking for. So, and, when I was applying for Social Security, my doctor would say, hey, Kelly, can you fill out the paperwork and just put it in front of me, and I'll read it and make sure everything's right, and I'll sign off on it. But I don't have time to fill it out.
Sure.
So we had those conversations, of course, to make sure, that he trusted me enough to do that. But again, that's where my background came in, helpful for me, is that I was able to do that because I understood the disease terminology and that sort of thing. But they're just so inundated in these doctors' offices.
Yeah.
And so, and then, I've been able to help some other people with that, like, what does a prior auth mean? What does the code mean? What is, and that makes me feel like I still am needed. So that's how my medical training has come in, so helpful for me. Also, just kind of knowing the physiology of some things when they say things. But I will say that NETs, with all the abbreviations and
Oh yeah.
acronyms and everything, in the beginning, I just was like trying to study just to learn the language. And that was
Yeah.
really hard because and I would see these patients just rattling these things off. And I was like, oh my God, they're smarter than a doctor. Like, how am I ever going to get there? So, I wish somebody had given me like a cheat sheet in the beginning or something for what all those abbreviations mean.
Sure.
But and I'm sure there is one. I just didn't know where to find it. So that was overwhelming in the beginning, like not even understanding the language. But yeah, that's obviously how my background comes into play, is just I understand some of the language that they're speaking, or understand what it means when they say we need to get a prior auth, or we need to do this or that. And I'm very thankful for that.
That's great. That's great. So before we finish up here, I do have one last question. And in terms of proper care, what do you think is the most important decision a new patient can make?
Well, I always say to get one of those mentors right away, because if I would have had my patient mentor earlier, all so many things would not have caused me so much alarm and worry. um, the Facebook groups were very helpful, but to have somebody that you can call, or they're going to call and check on you, and you can pretty much ask them anything or tell them anything, and they're not going to be judgmental. They're going to weigh in on, well, maybe you should do this. Because they're so far ahead of you. And I actually had two different people call me. I had a guy from Ohio call me once, and I remember that he told me this story where I want to say like his net started out in his lungs, but then had to spread to his bones. And I remember thinking, how are you sitting here on the phone talking to me? How are you alive? You know? So I just was listening and letting him finish his story. But the whole time I kept thinking, wow, so it could, because, when you learn about cancer, if it spreads to your bones, you're thinking, well, then you're not going to make it.
Right.
So, he finally gets all the way to the end, and he's like, I saw Dr. So and so, and he got me in a clinical trial and this and that. And he's like, and now I'm fine. And I just remember getting off the phone with him and thinking, wow, if that guy can survive it being not only in his lungs, but then it was in his bones, and now he's okay. Wow. What do I have to be scared about? So his story was just so crazy that, it stuck with me for years.
Sure.
And so I think that is really important, is if you're that kind of person that you really want to talk to someone who's been through it, and most people are, then it just can calm your fears so much to talk to someone who is years ahead of you in this. And I'm sure you probably heard of Ronnie Allen and his website. He's a patient in the UK.
Okay. Yeah. Yes.
The only thing that I disagree with him on is he doesn't like for us to be called zebras. I don't know
Ah,
why. But he does have some amazing information on his site. And um, he is always posting new articles, new blogs, what have you. And I didn't know about him in the beginning. I don't remember how long it took me to find him. But if you don't talk to somebody on the phone, then even though he's in the UK, um, there is so much good information on there for beginners that I wish I would have had access to. Um, and, I didn't realize that I could go look up, I don't know why, hello, I was from pharma, but go look up the doctors on YouTube and watch their talks, particularly Dr. Liu, because he's so good at talking to patients.
yeah.
He does that specifically. And it took me a while to find that out. But those are things that I wish I could go back and tell myself right away in 2018. Because if I would have been armed with that stuff, I would have been so much better off.
Great. It's great. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing your story and
Thank
some
you for
tips.
having me.
Just talking about things and sharing your experiences and your tips. It's important. It's important because hopefully somebody comes across this and learns, and I'm
Yeah,
sure they'll learn something from this for sure.
I hope so.
Yeah. But everybody, thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next month for another edition of Nets Get Real with NCAN. If you are looking for more information, looking for some events to join us with, or just kind of looking for some general information, please go to netcancerawareness.org and also interact with us on social media at netcanceraware. And we will see you next time.